what a lovely October to be once again free. Me, the Lord of Darkness, Count Fagula. Oh, it seems it's the smallest creature of the night, the chipmunk of evil. Merlin, how are you doing, sister?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, just sucking around. Cock. I am gay. That's my thing. Anyways, I gotta go to a seminar and teach kids about getting tested early for HIV. It's very important for you and me. Bye.
Wow.
Was that a fucking bat?
Gay programming.
Welcome to another episode of Gay Programming. It's a spooky time of year. It's the where ghouls and goblins get out of their crypts and start shaking their bones at poor little old ladies, and they start screaming. And I am FemMarks, aka Marceline, Marcie, and I am joined by my co-host, as you just previously were introduced by Count Fagula, but Merlin Kirby. Yeah, everybody applaud. I don't know why we're applauding. This is, yeah. How you doing?
I have the giggles. I'm okay. It's been a long day, but I'm feeling good. How are you?
I'm feeling great because today we got the audience a jam-packed episode that I want to get straight into. And we had a little spoiler. Some fucking idiot spoiled it on the last podcast. Not gonna point any names. It's probably someone on the crew, but someone spoiled it. But we're doing the Dracula episode, a big old Dracula retrospective, because again, it's October. It's the spooky time of year, and we wanted to do something in celebration of that because we're both big Halloween people. What better monster to focus on in a gay-centric podcast than Dracula? The gayest thing ever. It's very gay. But Merlin and I, Merlin has a lot of opinions about Dracula. In particular, the main source by Mr. Bram Stokers.
Stoker.
No, I'm pretty sure it's Stroker. I heard somewhere that someone said that, so I'm pretty sure that's the right way. Is a big fan of the original novel and has read it many times, I'm sure. And I'm not as familiar because I was never big into like horror books and like classic horror literature in that way. I'm really not interested in horror literature, period.
Yeah.
So I never really never really read much of the book. But Merlin has, and he has a lot of opinions on it, and I'm sure some stuff we can talk about. So take it away, baby.
Alright, yeah, so as I spoiled last episode, being not neurotypical, I fucking love classic horror novels to an unhealthy extent, borderline frantic and obsessive, but today it's coming in handy. So that was not a good finger crack.
I can add it. I can add that. I can add like a bunch of neck cracks, and like crackles.
Well,
and stuff.
because I cracked my knuckles like 10 minutes ago, and they haven't warmed
and also,
up
really,
yet.
if you wanted to like get a good sound, you could just.
I don't like cracking my fingers that way. It feels bad. I gotta do the other direction.
Well, you get a good crisp sound.
Wow.
Unless I hear it and it sounds like shit.
Yeah.
It sounds horrible. I'm eating my words right now. I'm editing that out so I don't look like a fool in front of the filmographers and the crowd.
Yeah. So yeah, Bram Stoker, a.k.a. my favorite gay monster fucker, aka I could fix him, I swear, just get me in a room alone with this guy.
Already hot on the insinuation that Bram wanted to fuck Dracula, or be fucked by Dracula, or fuck as Dracula.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll find out with your research, which looks very extensive. It's like a bunch of red ink on a piece of paper.
Well, I had to do red ink, of course.
Oh, I didn't even notice. That's clever.
I'm so clever.
Yeah.
Anyway, as a child, little Irish child, he was actually bedridden due to illness for like many years of his early childhood
Mm-hmm.
until he started going to school.
Did he like do we know like what disease he had, or did he just have like, was he just like weak immune system and he caught everything that fucking went through the door?
I think it's described to this day as unknown illness. Like, just...
Oh, wow. Maybe it was just embarrassing and they didn't even want that out in there. I don't know. Like, it could have honestly been he had like a big parasite on his dick.
Oh, yeah, no. Like, given the, how do I put this delicately, medical advancements or lack thereof of the time, yeah, they don't know. They don't know.
Mm.
So anyway, and then he got older, and I think he was actually very athletic once he kind of became not bedridden anymore.
Man, I've heard that story like a billion times of people. Like,
Yeah.
Roosevelt was just like that. He was like a sickly kid, and then as soon as he was done being a kid, he was like, okay, time to go to fucking Columbia and walk on the mountains.
I don't know. So unfortunately, the Oscar Wilde trials happened.
Well, for people who don't know,
Yeah.
because I'm sure there's plenty of people who are not familiar with Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
So give them a little understanding of who he was and what exactly he was tried for.
So Wilde and Stoker went to, I believe, Trinity College together, and they, I'm not going to say, like, oh, they were best homies, because, I didn't observe them interact, but they were at least acquaintances. They knew of each other. They spoke probably.
Wrote with each other, maybe.
Yeah,
sure.
They went to college together.
They were both aspiring writers, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then, unfortunately, or fortunate, I don't know. It's not unfortunate that Wilde ended up being outed as gay, or at least in a relationship with a man.
Mm-hmm. And also just, for people who have, like, no understanding of who Oscar Wilde is, just look up a picture of this man, and, like, any picture of him, and, like, the audacity of people around him to not recognize this man as clearly gay is absurd.
Yeah.
It's, like, crazy how hard it was to be caught as gay if you were a white guy in, like, that time period.
Yeah, so, prior to that, there was kind of this idea of, like, oh, yeah, sure, homosexuality's a thing, but, like, not no. And then the trials happened, and it kind of brought it into the public eye, to even the point where, like, the queer community at the time, a lot of people really hated Oscar Wilde because of him, quote unquote, there was now so much present active malice towards queer men. What?
It's just a crazy line of thinking where it's just like, damn, this guy sucks so many cocks in England that now we're all suffering.
Yeah, pretty much. So then, it's obviously kind of unclear as to why, but the timing is very interesting how, after the trials and everything, Stoker kind of immediately went into isolation and wrote Dracula right after.
Mm-hmm. Which is, like, telling, because, anyone who even has, like, a base understanding of, like, what Dracula is from, like, the cultural zeitgeist that it is now, it's definitely a very brooding piece. It's very something that you would create if you were in a, tenuous situation, especially one that is so directly to your sexuality, because I don't know if you've mentioned yet, but pretty clear signs that at the very least Bram was probably bisexual.
Yeah. I mean, part of me wants to be like, well, you can't speculate. It's not like you knew him or anything, but I'm gonna speculate.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially, you can start to speculate, especially in something when you have a writer who writes, like, when someone, like, actually, like, produces work, you can kind of sometimes read into that. Yeah. It's a dangerous knife to walk on, but, I mean, you don't just write about an attractive, like, Romanian dude, like, biting people's necks because you're, like, in a good place.
Yeah, yeah. Getting into that, the, idea that Count Dracula himself represents homosexuality obvious, and among other things, but which I'll get into. But I think it's worth noting that the idea at the time of what homosexuality was to the English people of the time, it was when a man's soul was fused, a man's body was fused with a female soul, thus causing the attraction to men. So that's what they thought homosexuality was, and that's what Dracula in a lot of ways is meant to represent.
Can we kind of get a brief understanding of what even the book is about? And just maybe your summary, your book report.
My book report? Boy, do I have one. Okay. So there's Count Dracula. He's in Transylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan Harker goes to him to do some business stuff. He wants to, buy property in London.
Yeah, Harker's just some, I don't think it's ever explicitly said what he is, but he's like some kind of accountant. Some kind of land realtor dealership of the time.
Or at least he works for one. So he's also got this lovely fiancée, Mina, who is back in London, and it's established very early on where, Harker refers to himself as an English churchman, how beautiful his fiancée Mina is, how much he loves her. It's very established that he is the nice protagonist, the good English man here.
Kind of almost like the idyllic, he's the cis-normative,
Yeah.
He's the one, he's basic bitch who is succeeding in the status quo.
Yes.
And will ultimately be the most plainest of canvases to be altered by the presence that he encounters.
Yeah, and, essentially he's the Victorian man's version of white picket fence. And then it goes into describing Dracula, and I actually highlighted a little quote of Dracula's description, if you're interested.
Mr. Dracula, Mr. Count Dracula.
Mr. Count Dracula.
And I would love for you to have the description of what Dracula looks like in the book, according to the man who popularized it himself, Mr. Bram Stokers.
His face was strong, very strong, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor.
Okay, so hold up. Hold the fuck up. Dracula has a mustache.
Big mustache. Covers most of his mouth.
Dracula has a big fucking Mario mustache, and we never knew this. We never knew. They tried to hide it from us.
Give Bela Lugosi a mustache.
Yeah, I want to see a version of Bela Lugosi where they edit in like a big giant CGI fucking mustache onto him.
Yeah.
I think it's funny too that his fangs are noticeably always out.
Yeah.
So he's kind of got like buck teeth, and he kind of starts like talking like this.
Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting too. I always, whenever I read that, I think about how the adjective peculiarly is used twice in the same paragraph, and how if I did that, I would certainly have like a language arts teacher bitching me out for it.
Mm-hmm.
But he can do it because he's Bram Stoker. I just get so petty about it.
Well, yeah, you also need to know that sometimes the old classics were just old classics because enough people fucking bought it.
Yeah. No insult to Bram Stoker's writing, of course, but...
I mean, full insult. I've never read a fucking word of yours, you stupid Irish cunt, and I never fucking will. Get the fuck out of here.
So anyway, Harker is chilling at Castle Dracula, and there's another character, Lucy, who is very dear friends with his girlfriend Mina, and there's letters that they have back and forth, and there's another interesting quote that is from a letter from Lucy to Mina. She's talking about, she's essentially got like these three stooges. One is from America, Canon Cowboy, because I remember you asking me.
They're all fucking cowboys, yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, there's a trio of Western cowboys, which is another thing that a lot of people, I think, are not aware is in Dracula.
Yeah.
Is there's fucking cowboys.
Harvesting mangoes in Tahiti.
So she's got like these three dudes all pining for her, and she's kind of...
Slut?
No, I was going to say, like, she's like, oh, but I like all of them, but I don't know which one I should choose. And she says, why can't they let a girl marry 3 men, or as many as want her, and save all this trouble? But this is heresy, and I must not say it. I feel like that's kind of an interesting thing to just throw out in your book, at such a time, anyway.
It kind of gives the inclination that, like, he at least was pining for polygamy of some kind of way, or like
Well,
a polyamorous relationship.
I don't know if I'd say that though, because I think if anything, it's kind of including a condemnation. Fuck. It's
You're real smart.
I know, baby. It's kind of including a condemnation of it, because like she dies and suffers, and
she's the slut. She dies,
Yeah.
and the virgin lives.
yeah, pretty much.
Kind of. She's kind of a virgin.
So anyway, yeah, they've got this friendship, and as I just revealed, eventually, after keeping Harker hostage in his castle, Dracula does get over to London, and then Renfield is kind of his... How would you describe their relationship?
Oh, well,
Stooge.
yeah, Dracula's got this stooge.
Who's kept in an asylum.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as like, because spoilers, we're going to be discussing some Dracula movies, and as far as I remember in those, he doesn't really do anything. I don't know if that is
He just runs around with ominous warnings and...
The Oracle. He's kind of
Yeah.
like the Oracle character that just kind of comes out to be like, Dracula's coming, you
Yeah.
better run.
Yeah. He's the plot device.
Yeah, someone's like making a movie about him now. They want to make like a movie about Renfield. Yeah. It's probably going to be horrible.
Then Dracula's there, and he's causing problems. I'm doing such a good job of describing this.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, this is, we don't need like every single beat, but you know, it's the story of Harker meeting Dracula and Dracula fucking up and altering this like pristine life.
Yeah.
And it is classic horror, and it's about the tension of whether or not this couple will live and survive Dracula or not, and ultimately they do prevail. And I guess like I should ask, because this is pretty important for the second hand of this discussion, is kind of what's the end of Bram's novel, like how does he end the famous tale of Dracula?
Yeah, so I would compare it most to the movie, because all the
Spoilers, everybody. I know this just hit the shelves, and maybe some of you are just now reading it, but spoilers.
Yeah. So, because all 3 of the movies we're talking about kind of do different things towards the end. I would compare it most to Bram Stokers' Dracula.
Well, yeah, because that was the third one we're going to watch, and that one's like the most faithful adaptation of all of them.
Pretty much. It's kind of the same thing, beat for beat. Lucy dies, and then they're worried about Mina becoming a vampire, so Harker, Van Helsing, and the Stooges of Lucy's all... go and try to take out Dracula in his home, pretty much. And that's pretty much it. That's really... One of them dies, but the couple lives. It's
not...
The ending, I do have to admit, for the novel, a little anticlimactic, just a smidge.
Well, yeah, I mean, but how awesome can you really end the plot line of a scary monster who comes to invade? Because there's only one conclusion for the normal, like, writing, unless you were just gonna go crazy and just be like, yeah, actually, in my version, it's Dracula fucking neck chops Renfield and kills them all.
Well, yeah, no, and I mean, like, I think the true thing about Dracula, at least the book, is it's not so much the fear of the vampire, it's the fear of what he represents, which I took a lot of notes on and wrote down a lot of feelings on. So yeah, I think that's kind of more where the fear is supposed to come from, is what's inferred from the culture at the time.
Well, I mean, since you have so much thoughts, I mean, like, tell us your thoughts of the mythical creature that pretty much is the reason why anyone fucking remembers Bram.
Yeah, so I want to be very clear. Stoker did not invent vampires by any stretch of the word.
Yes, this is a cultural, you know, you've all seen the YouTube video of, like, Mythbuster pieces of shit, but, you know, like that type of stuff. But vampires has been a cultural mythos for long, long, long before Bram ever touched it.
Yeah, but he did make it sexy.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one who made it sexy, which I think says a lot about him right off the bat, that vampires are typically very frightening, very monstrous, not as humanoid looking.
In fact, actually, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much confirmed that the book was the first time anyone had ever made, like, vampires into people. Like, they were undead people, and because previously they were just demonic beings of hell. And they literally looked like, you know, like what people think of, like, the chupacabra or something like that.
So I think it's very interesting that this man chose to sexify this, like, hideous creature. And I also just want to compare that to a quote I have. He wrote kind of a fanboy letter to Walt Whitman, who, very gay.
Yeah,
for those of you who
one
don't
of the
know.
most gayest American poets of all time.
Yeah.
Big beard guy.
Yeah. And he actually described his own appearance in that letter, which read as follows. I am 6 feet 2 inches high and 12 stone weight naked and used to be 41 or 42 inches round the chest. I am ugly but strong and determined and have a large bump over my eyebrows. I have a heavy jaw and a big mouth and thick lips, sensitive nostrils, a snub nose and straight hair. I am equal in temper and cool in disposition, and have a large amount of self-control, and am naturally secretive to the world. I take delight in letting people I don't like, people of mean or cruel or sneaking or cowardly disposition, see the worst side of me. So I take that, obviously a lot of self-loathing, also kind of a lot of
like... I was like, oh.
Yeah. Also, I think it's very interesting how he almost kind of weaponizes himself, using, like, oh, I don't mind letting shitty people see the worst side of me, as if he's some kind of, literally just like some kind of weapon against bad people.
Yeah, you know, it's almost like a fantastical, like, oh god, I don't even give a fuck, I'm such a badass.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting how in some ways he describes himself in that letter very opposite to the way Dracula is described, which one, he's a white man and Dracula is not, but I find it very interesting how he's like...
Maybe he didn't want to be white. You know?
I don't think so. If you look at some of his other feelings about certain cultures. I think it's very interesting, though, that he's like, okay, I gotta describe a hot man. Let me just go trait by trait and, like, do the exact opposite of every physical feature of my face.
Yeah, which is a very... If that's true, if that was, like, just his thought process of, like, what is an attractive man... Then he just go like, well, it doesn't look like me. Mm-hmm. It ain't this.
Speaking of his appearance, I found this out while I was brushing up on my Stoker knowledge, and I didn't actually know this. There are 0 photos of him smiling at all, but he was actually described to be like a pretty nice, happy guy.
Well, I mean, what, like, you know, sometimes, because, like, this, you know, he's, like, an old guy, he's, like, from the beginning of photography and stuff, like, all those photos, like, no one's fucking smiling.
a lot of portraits were not smiling, but it was not uncommon to have smiling photos. Like, oh, I'm with my sister, let's both do a little smile or something. Like, unformal.
I just think everybody in that time was just a dour fuck. You know, and, like, everybody's just like, oh, we have to get a family portrait. Okay, everybody, let's go to the gallows.
No, like, that was weird, though, for Stoker. Like, other people noticed that was weird. They were like, why do you never, ever smile?
Mm-hmm.
Like, most of the time we don't either, but you never do. So anyway.
It's my friend, clinical depression.
And I think it's very interesting how, I don't know if this is from the same letter to Walt Whitman or if he wrote another one, but I have another Walt Whitman letter quote for you.
Okay.
Alright. And this is evidence that he's gay. Is what I've classified.
You're fucking outing Bram? Holy shit.
Okay. You see, I have called you by your name. I have been more candid with you. Have said more about myself to you than I have said to anyone before. You will not be angry with me if you have read so far. You will not laugh at me for writing this to you. It was no small effort that I began to write, and I feel reluctant to stop. But I must not tire you any more. If you would ever care to have more you can imagine, for you have a great heart, how much pleasure it would be to me to write more to you. How sweet a thing it is for a strong, healthy man with a woman's eye and a child's wishes to feel that he can speak to a man who can be, if he wishes father and brother and wife to his soul. Mad gay. Mad gay. Are you kidding me?
It's pretty gay, yeah. I mean, I was already convinced he was gay when he was literally like describing his body like something out of Grindr.
Yeah, I know.
They're like, yes, I am.
This is how much I weigh. This is my height. This is the inches around my chest.
Get a good idea of what I look like. Here's a picture of me crying. You see a good idea of what my face looks like.
Yeah. So I just wanted to include that. Draw from that what you will. More evidence he's gay. So, a lot of his writings, particularly before the Wild Trials, were also, surprise, very gay. He had a pretty big hand, from my understanding, in writing of the play Sappho. And then also, he wrote the book The Man in 1905, which talks of a female protagonist named Stephen who was raised as a boy instead of a girl.
Oh, wow. So very gender bender you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he would go on to write literally the first fanfiction.net post ever to be written in the form of Dracula.
Yeah. So that was what he did before the trials. And then, yeah, after the trials, he just stopped talking to people and wrote Dracula.
Which is just more proof that everybody, if you want to get that great novel, isolate yourself further. Don't talk to your kids. Don't talk to your friends. Get in the room. Lock the door. Write. That's how you're gonna finish it. That's how you're gonna get Dracula.
Yeah. So going into some of the problems, though, after the trials, Stoker did become publicly homophobic. He called for gay authors to be arrested. Also,
he just wanted all of them to be in one place so he could mingle.
Also, not very kind views towards Roma and Jewish people, as evidenced in his book.
Yeah, I mean, there's a clear sign of all throughout all the future Dracula adaptations, and especially in even the source material, there's a heavy emphasis, or at least a subtext of the fear of foreigners the form of Dracula being literally a fucking hell monster.
Yeah, and if you think about the context of the time, England was obviously this awfully, terribly incredible empire, dominated the majority of the globe, but this was starting to secede at the time. Then, you write a book about this, evil Transylvanian who is wants to infiltrate London as an outsider purely to, like, drain its citizens of their blood and spirit and all of that stuff as an Eastern European. So that's pretty blatantly a problem.
Just a little bit. I mean, hey, it's, just a tiny bit. I get being racist since I'm an American, but...
Also worth mentioning, in more of his fears that Dracula represents, as an ill child of this time, it's pretty reasonable to postulate that he underwent bloodletting, particularly by leeches. So I'm sure that had an effect on his psyche. On to the closing out of my notes, which is just some interpretations of the book. Some are from me, some are from other people. Obviously, the fact that vampirism is portrayed as like a virus, you bite someone and you infect them with it. Kind of how evils and amoral behavior can spread and infect amongst an otherwise good and pure culture. I have seen some people say that blood is a symbolic stand-in for semen, and the neck biting is a stand-in for intercourse. I don't know, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like, intimate, and it's definitely aggressive. It's definitely, like, a act of, like... To kill someone in that way is, like, the most intimate way you could possibly kill someone. Because you're literally putting your fucking mouth on their, like, neck and draining something from them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sexual in some kind of, like, psychological mind frame kind of way.
And then a character or set of characters I haven't brought up at all yet is the brides of Dracula. He's got 3 lady vampires who live in his castle. That's really all you need to know.
They also like baby back ribs, I've heard.
Good one. A scene in the book where Jonathan is... The ladies are going for him. In all
Dracula's
kinds...
brides.
Yes,
yeah.
In all kinds of ways. Particularly the naked kind. Then the Count comes in, and he's like, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him when I have forbidden it? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you'll have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh of coquetry, turned to answer him. "You yourself never loved. You never loved." I kind of interpreted that as kind of like... Because, since the brides are an extension of Dracula, they bend to his will, they're...
His little goblins.
Yeah. And they want to fuck him. You could argue I'm reaching. I see it as saying, like... It's saying Dracula wants to fuck him in a time where saying that could have had very intense consequences. So he's basically just like, oh, well, I'm putting ladies as, like, the middleman here. So technically it's all heterosexual. You can't...
Yeah, it's not gay. Me. I'm just watching.
Yeah, even though one of the ladies literally accused Dracula of never loving when he brings up Harker. So that's interesting. And then my last note, very memey. I noticed as I was skimming the book again that as soon as Harker enters Transylvania, he writes in his journal that he's having queer dreams. Pun intended, ? I thought it was funny. In today's context.
I mean, hey, Bram may have been laughing to himself and been like, oh, well, I gotta remember to be, like, really homophobic after I write this so no one suspects.
Yeah.
Okay, so my portion of this podcast, since Merlin was an astute librarian, going over the tome to get you all some interesting perspectives on the origin of this big Shazam. But my bit was on the film section of it all. But really, we both were a part of it. We all watched these films, so we're going to talk a little bit about the 3. Because I feel like these 3 are probably the biggest and most culturally apparent adaptations of Dracula by Mr. Bram Stoker. We're gonna start with the granddaddy of it all, the one that just hit 100 years old. That's right, baby. It's the classic 1922. You've all seen it, I'm sure. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. This was a film that was directed by a guy named F.W. Moreau and produced by Piranha Films. And it's actually kind of interesting since this is actually an unauthorized and unofficial adaptation of Dracula. It was in no way associated with the original book. It's kind of apparent because if you just kind of look at the film, it's got some clear, apparent differences. Kind of honestly a little bit laughable differences. Before I get into that, it was your first time watching the film. I had watched it before, and I'll go into my thoughts, but what did you think about it? If you ask any director, most of the time they'll say this is their favorite film in the horror genre, and they'll be hoity-toity and feel so proud of themselves. But, yeah, I mean, what do you think as someone who's, not as into film?
So for me, like, I liked it. You know, it was my first time seeing it with you. It's Dracula.
Yeah,
but it's also not.
It's almost beat for beat. It's funny because like there is no Dracula, there is no mention of vampire.
Yeah.
What they did is they slightly changed it to where like now it's not Count Dracula, it's Count Orlok, and it's not vampire, it's Nosferatu, and it's not like any of the other Harker or any of them, and they even take out plenty of the secondary cast and make it very concise about those main characters with different names.
I did like, because my main gripe that I have with, arguably you could have this gripe with the book as well, I want the vampire to be a bigger character. But I feel like in the book, as well as a lot of the adaptations, the vampire is not, it's the villain, but it's a side character in a way. At least in terms of, like, screen time. I will say Nosferatu did do the best about that, and I could be misremembering. Someone's gonna be like, actually, I counted the seconds of all the movies that the vampires were in, and one of them had more, but, like...
Well, I mean, this is definitely... Even though it's conciseness, it does put a lot more focus on what I think the filmmakers were more interested in, which was the monster. They wanted to do a big, scary Dracula film.
Yeah. And as I was watching it, I kept kind of comparing it in my brain to a film that is very near and dear to my heart, and has been since I was 6 years old, The Seventh Seal. Because that came out in 1957, so just a few years after.
1957?
Yes. 1957.
Well, not a few years. It's 1922.
I know, but I'm using a very broad version of the word.
A lot of things happened between 1922 and 1957. Not, just a couple of big things.
Fair enough, but I don't know, close-ish, within a lifetime.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, you what makes you remember some stuff about Seventh Seal other than they're black and white?
No, I think like there's similarities in the pacing and general, almost to the point where I would I think there's similarities, even if it's just that's kind of how films were done at the time.
Yeah, well, the thing I will say about Nosferatu is, a couple more little tidbits of information about that is that it was a low-budget film, very, very low budget for the time, comparatively towards other films at the time. And it was specifically made for a German market by German directors and artists and actors and all that stuff. That's why primarily most of the names were changed to quite Germanic interpretations of it. But the thing I am always interested about Nosferatu, and especially visiting it now, and even though it still has like the trappings of like a silent film of its era, where it's not, you like as someone who's like been polluted by modern like filmmaking and stuff like that and its evolution, this is almost like watching a cave painting of like what film like was in the origin of it. But I would even say like comparatively towards other films of its own era, and even a couple of the films that we're going to talk about later, this film has such a deep understanding of what what film is and what it can be. Some things that I find really, just even the shots that you see, you look back in the day at some of these, old silent films, there are a lot of, very stagnant, very, set shots, where it's almost like a fucking wall right behind them, that's it. They had, some really impressive effects, even for the time, and ingenuity, where they were literally using, glass map paintings to impose the Dracula's castle and stuff like that. And just even to now, despite the few times where we see Orlok clearly walking around in the day because of the limitations of cameras of the time, it still looks just so good. There's just some shots that everybody's seen of him walking through the doorway, and it's just really impressive, especially for its time. This was probably the best you were going to get for a Dracula adaptation, because it focuses more exclusively on Dracula, and to the point where they make him just an outright monster, which I think is a little bit deviation from Bram's interpretation, where he wanted it to be more human and more, more like a person, like the undead, essentially.
Yeah.
And Nosferatu wanted to take it a little bit more back to the origins of the vampire myth, while still retaining, that anti-Semitism that's always juicy for old-time films.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's seen, understands or knows what Nosferatu looks like, or Count Orlok, anyways. And it looks so good. And and again, this is a film of the time, and there wasn't really much recorded about the process of making this, unfortunately. So I don't really know how they were able to make that costume of Count Orlok look as creepy as it does and look as good as it still does. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is honestly kind of the first creature pick, I think, that classic genre of the creature from Black Lagoon and Jason and Freddy and all this stuff. That's this is kind of the origin of that in a way.
Yeah.
One interesting little tidbit about it, though, is that, clearly when they were producing this film, they did not want to get sued. They could not get the rights to Dracula. I could never really figure out why they couldn't. Probably, honestly, they just couldn't afford it. They took out the second cast. They changed names. They took a little bit of a focus. They also were the very first people to actually have a vampire die from the sun. Because actually, in the original Dracula, they're actually weakened by the sun and not actually killed.
Yeah.
But this one was the first one to actually have Orlok burst into flames at the very end. But anyways, even despite those changes, fucking Bram Stoker's wife, his widow, sued the production company and ordered every single copy of Nosferatu to be destroyed. Now, thankfully, a few of them survived, and we now have it in our historical, archives and everything like that. I think it's a really great film. I think if you're in the mood, especially this Halloween, it's definitely a fun one to put on when you have some friends over, talk, drink, watch it, or, just sit alone. So the next movie that we're going to talk about is the big one, big famous one. This one I'm sure is going to get me in fucking hot water. It's fucking 1931 Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi.
Pull the string! Pull the string!
So yeah, it's the big classic. This is the Dracula film, and now is definitely kind of a cult classic favorite that people love putting on, and definitely love memeing, and still using Bela Lugosi's image, and also the myth of him is also continued on even after that performance. But I think starting the last one, this one is a film you have seen before, right? Quite multiple times.
Yes.
Tell me what you think about Dracula.
It's very cozy for me, in the sense of the cinematic mastery that is those fucking, like, rubber bats on the fishing line that they're just bouncing up and down outside, like, the window.
Yeah.
My God.
They fucking it's kind of funny. It's kind of fucking horrible that they keep using that prop. It literally is, like, on string, and it's, like, fucking just some guy, like, swinging it like a goddamn yo-yo up and down, up and down.
I love it.
And literally, like, yeah, like, and there's literally scenes you see the wire sometimes, like, through the restoration of it, I'm sure, through the process, but, yeah, it's
so good.
It's so bad.
No, I actually kind of like it, mainly because I like Bela Lugosi. I think the pacing of it is really good. You don't think so?
Oh my god, that's the shit I have to fucking say. I think the pacing in this is so fucking horrible. And I've always been wondering why, and I just thought, like, oh, maybe it's just because it's a film of the time. Maybe that's just, like, I'm just, like, bastardized by, like, modern pacing. But no, there's actually a real reason why this feels as slow as it does.
I like the slowness, though, because I think it kind of forces you to focus on, like, how do I word it? It kind of forces you to focus on everything and its implications, at least for me. Like, the slow pacing gives you more time to really dig into each scene and what's happening and what it all means. And because for me, when things go too fast, I skip all of it in my brain.
Well,
maybe that's just me, but...
Well, the thing is, just, like, I'm fine with, like, slow pacing or, like, things that, like, take time to build. But my biggest gripe with Dracula, especially in this version, is that it feels like a play. It doesn't ever feel like I'm watching a movie or anything that's, like, trying to encapsulate something like that. And I don't feel that way when I watch Nosferatu, which I feel is like, this is a film. This is like something that knows it's a film, wants to be a film, and is trying to be a film. When I watch Dracula, I'm just like, man, no one cares, and fucking, like, people have fucking plastic spiders just, like, moving up on the wall, like, none of the legs are moving. And, like, the web looks like something... Like, it turns out the web they actually used was, like residue from a cement, like, gun or something that they had. Like, it was some weird... I didn't write it down, but there was, like, some weird, like, cement, like,
was it, like,
mixture.
a caulking gun?
Yeah, something like that. But
oh, interesting. That's kind of creative.
Yeah. Was it, like... But it looks like something you'd buy. It looks like wool. It looks like that. I was just, like, so curious, like, why is that? And here's the thing. Dracula, 1931, is not based off of Dracula by Bram Stoker. It's based off of the stage play Dracula, which is based off of the book.
Okay,
so,
fair enough.
Yeah, that's basically the case. And, you know, like, I didn't really have time to research too much on the stage play. But from the gist of what I got, because this was produced by Universal. In fact, Universal is still the one who holds all the official rights to Dracula and vampires and all that shit. And it started with this movie. They acquired the rights, I think even a little bit longer than 1931. It was, like, quite a while. And they wanted to do something with Dracula. Basically, there was definitely a time when they were like, okay, we're going to make this movie. And we're going to base it off the novel. We're going to make it this big, awesome piece that has all these moving parts. But, again, this was a film that was made in 1931. The fucking Depression was still going on. So they really did, and even this was a big gamble because there was really no big, like, horror industry that was proven at this time. So they just kind of weren't really too sure, and they didn't want to hedge their bets like that. So they decided to make a much cheaper adaptation of Dracula, which would require basing it off the stage play. And they actually got Todd Browning to direct it, who's a really interesting dude. I actually know a little bit about this guy. If you have a chance, I highly encourage researching him. He was a very eccentric character. He started off his career as like a circus entertainer and a contortionist and all that kind of like freak show exhibits he also starred in. And then that eventually led him into becoming an actor. And then once he was an actor, he became a writer and a director, and then so on and so forth, and directed all these movies all throughout the 1920s. And was really like, genuinely like a real kind of auteur, like who kind of played all aspects of entertainment all throughout his career. The thing that was very apparent when he signed his contract with Universal, he signed like some kind of 3 or 4 film picture idea where he was going to develop and direct 4 pictures for Universal. And the first one was Dracula. And it was kind of a sign to him. He was interested at first, but then once he heard that it was going to be much limited and based off the stage play, because he had a career of directing kind of more crime, noir, drama pieces about, the retrobates of society. And he was assigned this picture mostly as a gamble. I don't know why they gave it to him. Maybe they thought that as like his career in circus and stuff like that he would have been more suited to like give a spectacle film that they may have been looking for. Mm-hmm. But regardless, as the process of like, how limited this project was going to be budget-wise, Browning got less and less interested in the project and was mostly at the end of it pretty much just there to get it fucking done, so he could move on to the next film. And that was pretty consistent with everyone who was involved in this film. No one really took it seriously. No one really thought it was going to go anywhere, except for one person who actually gave a shit about it. And that was Mr. Bela Lugosi.
Fuck you!
Who was reprising his role as Dracula because he actually starred in the Broadway production of Dracula as Dracula.
Right.
And that stage play that is now being adapted into the movie. And he had quite a career of going around the country and playing that role to multiple crowds all throughout the United States. Basically, when he found out and when this film was going to be around, this is kind of a fucked up thing. When he found out about the film, he was so excited. He was like, yes, I'm going to audition. Because he was so ready to reprise his role as Dracula because he fucked with it so hard. That he was willing to take only $500 a week. And granted, I mean, that's 1931 movie money, so I mean, he was still making okay money, but especially for his prominence in the role and everything. And also, it should be noted that David Manners, who plays Harker in this production, was getting paid $2,000 per week.
Wow.
Bullshit!
Like, literally, out of everyone in this film, Bela Lugosi was fucking in this. He wanted to do it. He wanted to be there. He fucked with being Dracula. There's a lot of people who recount times on the set while everyone else was kind of really unorganized and getting things ready. Bela would be in the corner in his outfit being like, I am Dracula, like, and getting really into the role and everything. And apparently there was like a real kind of like rumor going around that he was going crazy and really like going into it. But no, like in all accounts, it just seemed like he was a professional actor who had a real passion for this role. Like what are your feelings of Mr. Bela Lugosi?
You know my feelings. I love him in that movie. I think he's a cutie.
Well, do you think he's good though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the fence with Dracula, and again, it's mostly because of my distaste towards the film.
I think that's it, because I do have to, like, critique my favorite of the 3 we're talking about. And this is part of why I like it, I think, but it does have that very gimmicky American vibe to it. Like, you could kind of tell when watching it, a lot of people just kind of wanted to make a buck off of it.
Oh, yeah, and Universal was very clear that's what they wanted.
Yeah,
And they succeeded, because
Right.
this opened in 6th in the box office, made a shit ton of money, and launched the horror name as we know it, like the horror like movie industry as we know
and you think of like all of the other like classic horror movies that we got like right around the same time and everything. Like obviously it did a good job, and I do think that in this performance, Bela Lugosi definitely carried a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, even if I think sometimes his like acting is a little hokey in it and stuff, like he is definitely, his passion for it was the driving force behind the film. Because every time he comes on screen, the fucking film lights up.
Yeah.
And it's not boring anymore.
Which is
when
exactly...
most of the time it's kind of fucking boring.
Yeah, that's like exactly what I mean when I say I wish that Dracula, like the creature, had more screen time and more of a center in the film, less than being kind of the villain from the shadows. And I understand why they did it that way, but yeah, like you said, like Dracula being on screen is what makes the film, like the rest of it, worth watching. So I mean, that's how I feel anyway. Maybe I'm being harsh, but
I will also say something that you might find interesting. Apparently, when they were, because you know, films, especially when in this time of like studio production, that essentially the higher ups would get a cut of the film, they'd watch it, and then they'd have some notes about, okay, it's either good to go, or here's some things you need to fix that I don't like. Apparently, there was a little bit of a longer cut of it that Todd Browning was actually kind of proud of and thought was really good, and was hoping that would just be kind of accepted. But when the Universal Studio execs saw it, he said, I swear to God, he said it gave him the heebie-jeebies, which is the most 1930 way of saying you don't like a film.
yeah.
And he said that you needed to tone down on the horror.
No.
So that is kind of why I will say that even in its production, you do kind of get the sense that it's not gruesome, it's not horrifying, it's not haunting. It's not really anything. It's just it's at the end of the day, it's hokey with a really passionate performance from Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
Also, I will say too that I did read some reviews of the time that even though this was pretty well reviewed overall, there was definitely people who claimed that it wasn't as scary as the stage play. Which kind of makes me interested to learn more about this stage play, because what the fuck goes on in that stage play that's like, oh my god, this is fucking horrifying. But it did make a lot of money, but I will say, fun little tidbit before we move on to the final film that we're going to talk about, is that this film kind of ruined everyone's career, with exception to Bela Lugosi. It kind of worked in his favor, because he basically got to not only be kind of a cult figure of being Dracula, but also got to play Dracula in the stage play all over the country for years and years and years to come, along with some other reoccurring roles that he did from the time. But yeah, I mean, definitely after this time, he probably didn't get much more roles or different stuff. Everyone kind of typecasted him, but I think he was kind of content in that, as long as the work was still coming in. And there was definitely a time when the work was not coming in. He kind of fared all right, but Todd Browning is kind of the saddest part of the story. Essentially, this made so much money, and the studio execs were like, whatever the fuck you want to do this next one. This one's for you, but you gotta make just as much fucking money as you did on Dracula. We're banking on that. And his next film would be just a year later, and it would be called Freaks, which is a film that I'm actually very partial to. I've seen, and actually I think is much better than fucking Dracula, or at least the cut that we have, and not the secret final director's cut of Todd Browning that's supposedly so scary that gives people heebie-jeebies. Spoiler, it didn't make as much money as Dracula, and thus Todd Browning was kind of subjugated to go throughout the rest of his contract just making shitty reboots of like Dracula, with Bela Lugosi playing offshoots of Dracula, which do not look good. I checked out some trailers. They do not look fun. And after that would just kind of not really make much films after that and kind of lived a life in solitude as far as I understand. So it kind of destroyed his career because he could never live up to the financial expectations that it had set for him. Also, one little thing that I'll say is that apparently a lot of people got typecasted if they got cast at all anymore. But the guy who got the most typecasted, can you guess? Can you guess who got
Renfield?
Yeah, damn right, it's fucking Renfield. Yeah, Dwight Fry was pretty much forever typecasted because of that as a crazy nut job who's going around. And I will say, actually, you know, now that I remember him, he's definitely probably the other best actor in it.
Yeah.
With the exception of Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
He actually gives a pretty awesome performance as Renfield, so I could kind of understand why forever he would be typecasted as
I liked his
creepy,
performance.
schizophrenic, crazy guy.
Yeah, I liked his performance in that too.
You love it. I have middling opinions of it, but I understand its cultural importance, especially now as we just kind of look at it as like this kitschy thing that we all like, and especially with Bela. So, if anything, this film should be remembered as Bela Lugosi's triumph.
If you want to make out with a young lady, take her to see Dracula.
Final one that we're going to talk about a little bit. We've already kind of talked about most of it because it's pretty much a beat-for-beat retelling of Dracula. But I still want to talk about it because I think it's a really interesting film.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna jump into my first fucking.
Well, let me tell you what the film is first. Bram Stokers' Dracula from 1992, which is directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And also produced by him, which is interesting. I did not know that. So this is basically, he got Columbia Pictures to distribute it later, but as far as I know, pretty much produced this entire film out of his own pocket, which is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Especially if you've seen this film.
Yeah.
It's one of those films that, you know, when I saw again that it was from 1992, I was like, it does feel like a 90s film. Like, there's a lot of aspects,
especially early 90s.
But it's exceptionally good because this is in the time. If you're not familiar, if you're not a film buff, you know, you may not know who Francis Ford Coppola is. But Francis Ford Coppola is in that era of filmmaking where, you know, we had these, like, couple of guys like him, Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, who were just, like, producing, like, some incredible fucking films. And he was probably the craziest among him because he did one of my favorite films of all time, Apocalypse Now, where he literally went to fucking Vietnam to film the entire film. And he also directed stuff like Godfather as well, which I'm less partial to.
It insists upon itself.
This is a guy who really had some of the most influential shit of the time. Now he makes garbage films that no one fucking watches. Netflix won't even fucking take them. But this one was kind of the near end of Francis giving us good films that he really cared about. And honestly, if this is one of the last one, what a way to go out. Because this thing is nothing short but epic. And it is the definitive, like, production of, like, Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is the Dracula.
I hate the casting.
Yeah, that's the first thing we gotta talk about. It's even though this film is incredible production wise.
Oh yeah.
Well, okay, I shouldn't say all the casting because it's mostly just Keanu Reeves. It's mostly Keanu Reeves.
I don't know. I can't remember her name.
Her British accent is at least more convincing.
Sure.
She is definitely better in that role, I will say, than Keanu just, like, does not sell it at all. And I will say, like, I did a little research or a little digging on, like, what, you know, Keanu feels about it and what Francis Ford Coppola feels about it. And it really just seems like everyone regrets the decision. Because Keanu Reeves was like, oh man, I was wiped out after all these films. I was doing back to back to back. And then I signed on to this thinking it was going to be great. But I was just so fucking worn out. So I couldn't give anything. So I didn't give anything. And then Francis Ford Coppola is like, I just needed a heartthrob to make the fucking women have wet pussies so they'd come see my film about Dracula. So I got Keanu Reeves, but I shouldn't have gotten Keanu Reeves. And you want to know who was considered before? Fucking Steve Buscemi, of all fucking people.
Interesting.
Yeah, like, it's so fucking weird, like,
Yeah.
having him, like, even imagining him playing Harker. But definitely Keanu Reeves is not a great choice, and is definitely the weakest part of the film. But I would say the rest of the cast is pretty good. Like, Gary Oldman fucking kills it as Dracula. Gives like a bunch of different performances, so he's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the film. I remember watching it back when I worked overnights at the shelter. I watched it on my laptop. I don't like long movies. I don't care like how
it's
good
long.
it is.
It's long.
I can watch it in segments, but if I try to watch anything, like an hour and a half is fucking pushing it for me to sit still for one duration.
Yeah, and 2 hours and 20 minutes is entirely fucking different.
Yeah, and like I can see why they did it that way because again, like they literally narrated direct quotes from the book in the movie.
This is beat for fucking beat.
Yeah, so they didn't want to cut out anything, I'm sure, which fair enough.
This is honestly like for horror, like classic horror fans, this is like Lord of the Rings. This has like, cause it just does everything.
And the other thing I will say that they did really well is that I, don't think the other two films captured quite as much is the perverseness of Dracula. Like, this fucking book that I'm holding right here was written by a goddamn pervert. I think the movie captured that. Like, they were not afraid to explore and portray that part of it, where I think some of the other movies, especially Bela Lugosi's Dracula, like, good looking and everything, but he's
was limited to the times because, there was definitely, like, I didn't mention it, but there was definitely even, like, earlier scripts that were a little bit more explicit or sexual. There was even, like, a scene where Bela Lugosi actually kisses someone on the lips, but then they were like, too perverse, that's gonna get riots, nuh-uh.
Yeah, of course.
But this one is a film that doesn't have those barriers, and like for everything it's worth, this is a Dracula that brings the most important part of the novel, which is everybody want to fuck each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The things that I really love about this film.
I love the soundtrack. Sorry to cut you off.
Well, no, I was just about to say that.
Oh,
where
really?
I was like, I really love like all the aspects of production on this film. Like the music's incredible, the costumes are great, the fucking camera work is fucking made by an insane man.
Yeah. Because
one thing, if you don't know, this film really, even though it is like a film that like is really, again, like the Lord of the Rings of Dracula, essentially, like that kind of style where they want to get beat for beat. This film also feels like an absolute celebration of film and the history of film. And even though it is about giving the most possible faithful film retelling of Dracula, it does feel like it has a lot of homages to things like Nosferatu and even a little bit of Dracula and Bela Lugosi's stuff. Because there's like directly like quotes that are developed from Dracula, where I'm pretty sure Gary Oldman does also say, "I don't drink wine."
Yeah, and I think they both do the line, that's of course from the book, but creatures of the night, what music they make. And, yeah.
So they're like, it's a real celebration, and what they did that what I think is really cool, even for like films at the time around in the 90s. They did all the effects in camera. Mm-hmm. So basically, with the exception of the blue flames, the horrible fucking CG blue flames, and those are the only ones that aren't made from in camera. But everything else is done in camera. And if you're not familiar with film, what that means is basically all the effects weren't done in post; they were done as they were being shot. So I think like probably the most impressive one is there's like a shot where Keanu Reeves is writing in his journal about traveling to Transylvania, and you see a ship, not a ship, but you see his train going off into the distance, And that was like all done in like they built a giant book and they filmed it up close and they had a little model train in the background and a little set, and it was just like, you know, that kind of ingenuity in films is so rare, especially in new Francis Ford Coppola films. You don't see that anymore. But and also the fucking fabulous puppet fights in the beginning of the film. Where fucking Count Dracula fights as a fucking puppet. It's awesome. It's incredible. It's creative. It's great. Yeah, I mean, just like the costumes too. Like, just they do some weird shit with like costuming where they're like giving Dracula like a fucking kimono. Like, and it looks cool. It looks awesome though. And I think that's just like ultimately my feelings towards it. That this is, if you are a real big fan of the novel, if you really love the novel and you're just like looking for that in a film, this is the one you gotta watch because it does everything right. For made by Dracula fans, for Dracula fans. But yeah, it does get long. It is a very long sit, especially at 2 hours and 20 minutes. So what are your feelings on it overall? You seem to like it though.
Yeah, I like it. It's funny. I was just thinking because I was thinking about that movie and the scenes in it. There's one thing that I don't think any of the movies do, and I wish they did, because I think relating the movies in general, with the exception, I guess, of Nosferatu, in the book, Dracula's, like, you know, obviously he's cunning, he's suave, he's all these things. Pretty fucking weird, too, though. Like, does things where both the reader and Harker are just like, why the fuck did you do that? And obviously the reason is vampire stuff. For example, you know the scene that happens where Harker's shaving and he cuts himself, Dracula is not in the mirror, and he says something that it's a bauble of human vanity or something, and he just sets it down and, like, leaves, pretty much, after licking the razor blade or whatever. Well, in the book, he takes his mirror and chucks it out the fucking window, and Harker's just like, well, shit, I did...
But they kind of do that in the 1931 Dracula.
Where he slaps
the mirror. Yeah. The super awesome special effects of the time. Hey, he's not there! Turn the camera around. He's there!
I just think that would be so funny just to see, like, the actor who played Dracula in the Bram Stokers Dracula just reel back and fling it out the fucking window, and then Keanu Reeves just standing there.
Yeah, I mean, and also I will say too, the big difference in this is that Dracula is actually fucking scary, and he transforms into monsters, and we see it, and it's not just like, oh, he's walking off screen and we hear a wolf or something. He's like, oh, he's turned into a wolf. If you like Dracula, check it out. It's a beast. It's a beast. And probably one of the last great films that, you know, a modern studio was able to produce. So, you know, as much shit as I would give on Francis Ford Coppola, much respect to you. That's a fucking dope-ass film. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Gay Programming. As always, we hope you enjoyed in this lovely, ghoulish time of year on our big old retrospective on Dracula. Thank you again, Merlin, so much for reading and telling us about things about that, and hope you enjoyed the movies that we watched.
Can we do Frankenstein next? Because I have just as many thoughts.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll see how long this takes. Yeah, we'll definitely be seeing you soon. Maybe with a Frankenstein episode, maybe another episode, who fucking knows. But you quick little pitch of different things. You can check us out at Gay Programming on Instagram to get updated whenever new episodes are around. You can check me out at FemMarks to watch my poetry and my drawings and all that jazz if you're into it. You can follow Merlin over at fae.punk on Instagram if you're interested in a lifestyle blog about his life and all that, or just make friends. Who fucking knows? Just friend him if you want, or not. It's up to you. But you can also check out AWP, Accessible Wellness Project, which is also going to be linked down below, which is Merlin's nonprofit that you can read about and get involved with if you want. So yeah, that's all our little pitches real quick. You got anything else you want to say, Merlin?
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again in the dark hours.